The Persian Empire was once the largest empire the world had ever seen. It stretched from Egypt to India, ruled almost half the human population alive at the time, and built roads, libraries, and palaces that left the Greeks speechless. But here's the strange part. If you look at a map today, you won't find Persia anywhere. The country is called Iran. So what happened? How does a name that survived 2,500 years of conquest, plague, and empire just vanish from the map almost overnight? And more importantly, who decided to erase it? To understand that, we have to go back to a place where civilizations rose and fell on the same patch of dirt for thousands of years. Somewhere around 550 BC, a young man named Cyrus walked into a kingdom called Media and politely asked for the throne. The Medes laughed. Cyrus was technically their vassal, a minor king ruling a backwater province called Persis in the south. His own grandfather, the Median king Astyges, had once tried to have him killed as a baby because of a prophetic dream involving a vine growing out of his daughter's womb. The servant tasked with the murder couldn't go through with it and handed the infant to a shepherd. Cyrus survived, grew up, and now he was back. By the end of the year, Astyges was in chains. The Median capital was Cyrus's capital, and a brand new empire had a brand new ruler. The Persians had arrived. Cyrus didn't stop there. He swallowed Lydia in modern-day Turkey, where the famously wealthy King Croesus had foolishly attacked him after misreading an oracle. Then he marched on Babylon, the most prestigious city on earth, and took it without a fight in 539 BC. The Babylonians literally opened the gates for him. Why? Because Cyrus had figured out something almost nobody else in the ancient world understood. People hate being conquered, but they hate being humiliated more. He didn't burn temples. He didn't drag populations into slavery. He freed the Jewish exiles Babylon had been holding for 50 years and sent them home to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem, a move so generous the Hebrew Bible literally calls him the anointed of the Lord, a Persian king. Anointed, in a Jewish holy book. That tells you how different Cyrus was. Cyrus died in 530 BC, fighting some obscure tribe out on the steppe. The empire passed to his son Cambyses, who promptly conquered Egypt, and then, according to ancient gossip, lost his mind. He allegedly killed a sacred bull, married his own sister, and died under mysterious circumstances after stabbing himself in the thigh while mounting a horse. The throne was up for grabs. Into the chaos rode a young noble named Darius, who killed a usurper, claimed Cyrus's bloodline through a tangled family connection nobody could quite verify, and started building the empire into something the world had genuinely never seen. Darius was an organizer. Cyrus had been the conqueror. Darius was the man with the spreadsheet. He divided the empire into 20 provinces called satrapies, each run by a governor who answered directly to him. He standardized coinage, weights, measures, and tax rates. He built a road, the Royal Road, that ran 1,700 miles from Sardis to Susa, with relay stations every 15 miles where royal messengers could swap horses and keep riding. A message that used to take 3 months now took 7 days. The Greek historian Herodotus described the riders with a line that ended up carved on the New York post office. Neither snow nor rain, nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers. That's a Persian invention, not an American one. Darius wanted Greece next. The trouble was, the Greeks didn't want to be conquered. In 490 BC, his army landed at a beach called Marathon, expecting an easy fight against a few thousand Athenian farmers. The Athenians charged downhill at a dead sprint, smashed into the Persian line, and somehow won. Darius died before he could try again. His son Xerxes inherited both the throne and the grudge. So the Greeks are blocking the pass at Thermopylae. How many? 300. 300,000. 300. Total. We have 250,000 men. Just walk around them. They're holding the only road. Then I suppose we'll have to go through them. It took 3 days. The Spartans died to the last man. Then Xerxes burned Athens, watched his fleet get destroyed at Salamis, lost his army at Plataea the following year, and went home with nothing. The greatest empire on earth had been humiliated by a handful of city-states. The cracks had started. For the next 150 years, the Persian Empire kept rolling on autopilot. The kings got softer, the satraps got greedier, and the army stopped being the terrifying machine Cyrus had built. By the time a young Macedonian named Alexander showed up in 334 BC, the empire was running on reputation alone. Alexander was 22 years old, broke, and leading an army of about 40,000 men into a country with millions. On paper, this was suicide. In reality, it took him 11 years to conquer everything from Greece to the edge of India. The Persian king at the time was Darius III, a decent man who had inherited a job he wasn't really built for. He fought Alexander at Issus in 333 BC, lost badly, and fled the battlefield so fast he left his mother, wife, and daughters behind in the royal tent. Alexander, who genuinely admired Persian culture, treated them like family. 2 years later, they fought again at Gorgamla. Same result. Darius ran. This time his own bodyguards turned on him, stabbed him, and dumped his body by the side of the road, hoping Alexander would reward them for the favor. You killed your own king. He was going to lose anyway, so you thought we'd be grateful. We thought you'd want him dead. I wanted him captured. He was a king. You don't murder a king in a ditch. We can serve you instead. You can serve me by being executed. That seems unfair. So was leaving him in a ditch. Alexander gave Darius a royal funeral and then died himself 8 years later in Babylon, possibly from poisoning, possibly from drinking, possibly from a mosquito. His generals carved up his empire like a wedding cake. Persia ended up under a guy named Seleucus, who founded a Greek-flavored dynasty that ruled badly for about a century before falling apart. Then, out of the eastern steppes, came a nomadic people called the Parthians. They were horse archers. They were brutal, and they spent the next 400 years humiliating the Romans. The Romans never conquered Persia. They tried. They tried so hard. In 53 BC, a Roman general named Crassus marched into Parthian territory with 7 legions, got surrounded in the desert, and had molten gold poured down his throat as a joke about his famous greed. Rome got the message. Persia was untouchable. By 224 AD, the Parthians had run out of steam. A local king named Ardashir from the old Persian heartland of Persis rebelled, killed the last Parthian ruler in single combat on the battlefield, and announced that the original Persian Empire was back. He called his dynasty the Sassanids, after his grandfather Sassan. For the next 400 years, the Sassanids would be the most powerful empire on earth that wasn't called Rome, and the one thing Rome could never beat. Ardashir rebuilt everything. He revived Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion of fire temples and cosmic battles between good and evil, and made it the official faith of the state. He standardized the language, the coinage, and the army. Persia was Persia again. His son Shapur took it further. In 260 AD, the Roman Emperor Valerian marched east with 70,000 men to teach the Persians a lesson. Shapur surrounded him near Edessa, captured the emperor alive, and then did something no Persian king had ever done. He kept him for years. Roman sources claimed Shapur used Valerian as a human footstool when mounting his horse. When Valerian finally died, Shapur allegedly had him skinned, stuffed with straw, and displayed in a temple as a trophy. Whether that part is true or Roman propaganda, the message was clear. Persia had captured a Roman emperor, and Rome could do absolutely nothing about it. Your Majesty, the Roman Senate is demanding their emperor back. They can have him. Really. When I'm done with him, and when will that be? When he stops being useful as a footstool, he's an emperor, he's a steppe. The Senate will not accept this. The Senate can come get him. The wars between Persia and Rome dragged on for centuries. They fought over Armenia, over Mesopotamia, over trade routes, over pride. Both sides bled millions of men. Both sides built massive border fortifications. Neither side could finish the other off. By the early 600s AD, the Sassanid king Khosrow II nearly succeeded. He captured Jerusalem, stole the true cross, and pushed all the way to the walls of Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius pulled off a desperate counterattack, drove the Persians back, and signed a peace treaty that left both empires exhausted, broke, and bleeding. They had spent 400 years fighting each other into a coma, and down south in the deserts of Arabia, somebody had been quietly watching. In 632 AD, the Prophet Muhammad died in Medina, leaving behind a small but ferociously motivated community of Arab Muslims who suddenly believed they had a divine assignment. Within 4 years, they were knocking on Persia's door. The Sassanid king at the time was a teenager named Yazdijerd III. His army was tired, his treasury was empty, and his nobles were busy stabbing each other in the back over who got to be the real power behind the throne. Arabs, by contrast, had nothing to lose and everything to gain. They were a desert people who'd never owned a city. Now they were eyeing the richest empire in the world. The two armies met in 636 AD at a place called Al-Qadisiyah in modern-day Iraq. The Persians had elephants, cavalry, and roughly 4 times the numbers. The Arabs had faith and a general named Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who reportedly directed the battle from a rooftop because he was too sick with boils to ride. The fighting lasted 4 days. On the last day, a sandstorm blew straight into the Persian faces. The Arab cavalry charged through it and broke the line. The Persian commander was killed. The royal banner, a sacred standard called the Drafsh Kavyani that had supposedly been carried since the dawn of the empire, was captured and cut into pieces, with the jewels divided among the soldiers. How is the battle going? The wind has turned against us. Then turn the wind back. I cannot turn the wind, my lord. Why not? Because I am a general, not a god. Then find me someone who is. Sir, there is no one. Then we have already lost. The Arabs took Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, a year later. They walked into a palace so magnificent they thought the carpets were gardens and tried to water them. They found a throne room with a crown so heavy it had to be suspended from the ceiling by golden chains. They loaded it all onto carts. Yazdijerd III fled east, running for years from city to city, begging governors for help nobody could afford to give. In 651 AD, hiding in a miller's hut near Merv, he was murdered by the miller himself for his jewelry. The last Sassanid king, killed for his rings. The empire that had humiliated Rome for 4 centuries was gone in a generation. Here's where the story takes a turn nobody saw coming. The Arabs conquered Persia, but Persia conquered the Arabs right back. Not with armies. With culture. The new Muslim rulers needed someone to actually run the empire they'd just won, and they had no idea how. They were tribesmen from the desert. The Persians had been running massive bureaucracies for 1,000 years. So within decades, Persian administrators, Persian poets, Persian engineers, and Persian scholars were quietly reshaping the entire Islamic world from the inside. When the Abbasid Caliphate took power in 750 AD and moved its capital to Baghdad, the city they built was Persian in everything but name. Persian advisors ran the court. Persian was the language of culture. Even the architecture, the gardens, and the court ceremonies were lifted straight from old Sassanid blueprints. The Persians kept their language. That was the miracle. Almost every other people the Arabs conquered, from Egypt to Syria to North Africa, eventually started speaking Arabic. The Persians didn't. They wrote their language using Arabic letters. They borrowed thousands of Arabic words, but Persian itself survived. Around the year 1000, a poet named Ferdowsi spent 30 years writing an epic poem called the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, recounting the entire mythical history of Persia from the dawn of time to the Arab conquest. 60,000 lines. He deliberately used as few Arabic loanwords as possible. He was building a time capsule for Persian identity, and it worked. Iranians still read it today. You've been working on this poem for how long? 30 years. And what does it do? It saves us. Saves who from what? Saves us from forgetting who we were. We were conquered. Yes, our religion is gone. Yes, our kings are gone. Yes, but not our words. So you're writing a poem to fight an empire. I'm writing a poem so the empire doesn't get to write us out of history. Then in 1219, exactly as we talked about with the Mongols, a greedy governor named Inalchuk executed a Mongol trade caravan. Genghis Khan turned his entire army west. The Mongols hit Persia like a hammer hitting glass. Samarkand, Bokhara, Nishapur, Merv, Herat. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years were flattened in weeks. Nishapur alone lost an estimated 1.7 million people. The Mongols built pyramids of skulls outside the gates. Persia had survived Alexander. It had survived the Arabs. The Mongols nearly finished the job. The Mongols who stayed behind in Persia, the Ilkhanate, did exactly what every conqueror before them had done. They went native. Within 50 years, the grandchildren of the men who'd burned Nishapur were writing Persian poetry, building Persian mosques and converting to Islam. In 1295, the Ilkhan ruler Ghazan officially converted, and Persia digested another empire whole. But the wounds didn't heal fast enough. In 1370, another warlord rose out of Central Asia, a man who would make even the Mongols look polite. His name was Timur, or Tamerlane in the West, and he claimed descent from Genghis Khan despite having no real connection. He walked with a limp from an old arrow wound, which is why his enemies called him Timur the Lame. He didn't mind. He just killed them. Timur swept through Persia in the 1380s and built towers of human skulls outside cities that resisted. Isfahan, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, surrendered to him peacefully. Then it rebelled when his tax collectors got too greedy. Timur came back and ordered every soldier in his army to bring him a fixed quota of severed heads. Estimates say 70,000 people died in a single day. He moved on, sacked Delhi, defeated the Ottoman Sultan, and died in 1405 while planning to invade China. His empire fell apart almost immediately after he died. Persia was a wreck again. You've built another tower of skulls, sir. How many this time? 70,000. Should we be concerned about morale? Whose morale? The soldiers. They seem tired. They are paid to kill, not to be tired. They are also paid to feel things occasionally, my lord. Tell them they can feel things when we've reached China. Then in 1501, a 14-year-old boy named Ismail rode into the city of Tabriz at the head of a small army of fanatical followers called the Kizilbash, the Red Heads, named for their distinctive red turbans. He declared himself Shah, claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad, the ancient Sassanid kings, and pretty much everyone else with a famous name, and announced that Persia was going to convert, not just to Islam. To Shia Islam specifically, the minority branch, the one the rest of the Muslim world had been suppressing for centuries. He gave the country a choice: convert or die. Most people converted. The ones who didn't were killed publicly in city squares. This was the moment that made modern Iran. Shah Ismail's decision to force Shia Islam onto Persia created a religious border that still exists today, separating Iran from the Sunni Arab world around it. The Ottomans, who ruled the Sunni Muslim world from Istanbul, were horrified. They considered the Safavids heretics. In 1514, the Ottoman Sultan Selim the Grim marched east with cannons and muskets to wipe Ismail out. They met at the Battle of Chaldiran. The Persians had cavalry and swords. The Ottomans had artillery. Ismail charged anyway. The Ottoman guns shredded the Kizilbash. Ismail himself barely escaped, lost his favorite wife to capture, and reportedly never smiled again for the rest of his life. He spent his remaining years drinking heavily and died at 36. But the Safavid dynasty survived, and a century later it produced a king who would put Persia back on the map. Shah Abbas the Great took the throne in 1588 at age 16 and ruled for over 40 years. He built a new capital at Isfahan that became one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Massive blue-tiled mosques, a central square so enormous you could play polo on it, and people literally did. European ambassadors arrived and wrote home that Isfahan was finer than anything in Paris or London. There was a saying, Isfahan is half the world. Abbas crushed the Ottomans, reorganized the army around firearms, and welcomed Christian traders, Armenian merchants, and English advisors into his court. Persia was wealthy, sophisticated, and respected again. Then it all fell apart. After Abbas died, the Safavid kings got worse with each generation. By 1722, the empire was so weak that a small army of Afghan tribesmen marched in, besieged Isfahan, and starved it into surrender. People ate leather, dogs, and eventually each other. The Shah handed over the crown. The greatest Persian dynasty in centuries ended with a tribal warlord sitting on the throne in a city full of corpses. How many men did the Afghans bring? Around 20,000. We have 100,000 troops in this empire. None of them are here. Where are they? Some are in Georgia. Some are in Khorasan. Some have not been paid in 2 years and have gone home. So we have nothing. We have you, my lord. That is not encouraging. Out of the chaos rose a brilliant, paranoid, and increasingly insane general named Nader Shah, who would briefly make Persia terrifying again before everything collapsed once more. Nader Shah was the kind of military genius who only shows up once or twice a century. He kicked the Afghans out, beat the Ottomans, beat the Russians, and then in 1739 did something that nobody had attempted in centuries. He invaded India. He marched on Delhi, defeated the Mughal emperor in a single afternoon at the Battle of Karnal, and walked into the richest city on earth. After a riot broke out and some of his soldiers were killed, Nader ordered a general massacre. For an entire day, his army butchered the citizens of Delhi. Estimates run as high as 30,000 dead. Then he loaded up his treasure carts. He took the peacock throne, an actual throne studded with thousands of jewels. He took the Koh-i-Noor diamond, the most famous diamond on earth, which would later end up in the British crown. He took so much gold and silver that he cancelled all taxes in Persia for 3 years. Then he went insane, possibly from a head injury, possibly from sheer paranoia, possibly because absolute power genuinely does what people say it does. He had his own son blinded after suspecting him of plotting against him. He executed officials by the dozen. By 1747, his own bodyguards crept into his tent at night and stabbed him to death. The empire he'd built shattered the moment he died. Persia was carved up by warlords for the next 50 years. In 1789, a tribal chief named Agha Mohammed Khan, who had been castrated as a child by a rival warlord and held a grudge against literally everyone, founded the Qajar dynasty. The Qajars ruled Persia for the next 130 years, and they ruled it badly. They lost 2 wars to Russia and watched the Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan all get peeled away. They racked up massive debts to European banks. They sold concessions to British companies to drill for oil, run the tobacco trade, and print the currency. By the early 1900s, Persia wasn't really a country anymore. It was a buffer zone between the British and Russian empires, who'd literally drawn a line across the map and divided it into spheres of influence. What do the British want now? Oil rights for 60 more years. What do the Russians want? The North. What do we get? Loans. So we are selling our country to pay for our country. Yes, my lord, that seems like a flawed system. It is the only one we have. In 1921, a tall, intimidating Cossack officer named Reza Khan marched on Tehran with 3,000 men and seized the government. He was a self-made soldier with no education, no noble bloodline, and an almost terrifying capacity for getting things done. Within 4 years, he had pushed aside the last Qajar Shah, crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, and started dragging Persia into the 20th century whether it wanted to go or not. He built railways, founded universities, banned the veil, forced men to wear European hats, crushed tribal rebellions, and built a modern army. He admired Ataturk in Turkey and Mussolini in Italy, and he wanted Persia to be respected the same way. Which brings us to 1935. That year, Reza Shah sent a formal request to every foreign government on earth. From now on, his country was not to be called Persia in diplomatic correspondence. It was to be called Iran. The name had always existed. Iranians themselves had called their land Iran for over 2,000 years. It comes from an ancient word meaning land of the Aryans, referring to the original Indo-European peoples who'd settled the plateau thousands of years before. But the outside world had always used Persia, after the southern province of Persis where Cyrus had started. Reza Shah was done with that. He wanted a clean break, a new name for a new nation. Some say he was influenced by Nazi racial theories floating around Europe at the time. Others say he was simply asserting what Iranians had always called themselves, probably both. You want us to call your country what? Iran. We have always called it Persia, and we have always called it Iran. But Persia is the word in every map, every book, every treaty. Then you will need new maps, new books, and new treaties. This is going to confuse everyone. Good. Confused people remember things. They will think it is a different country. It is a different country. We are no longer the country you remember. And just like that, after 2,500 years, the name Persia disappeared from the map. The empire that had ruled half the world under Cyrus, that had humbled Rome under Shapwa, that had been flattened by Mongols and reborn under Safavids, finished its long story under a new name. Reza Shah was overthrown by the British in 1941. His son was overthrown by the Islamic Revolution in 1979. But the name stuck, Iran. If this is your kind of story, you'll probably love what happened next. because the 1979 revolution is one of the wildest political earthquakes of the entire 20th century, and almost nobody outside Iran really understands how it actually went down.